Well, no, that's, the bottom line is he moved around quite a bit. He was born on a farm southwest of Wapakoneta. And then they lived in St. Mary's, Upper Sandusky. Uh, they lived in Wapak, of course, where he lived here through his high school years. But they moved around quite a bit because Neil's father was a state auditor. And they would move from town to town to town as he was doing the auditing jobs. They would move a place, he'd work, a certain area for a while, and they moved someplace else. So he did live in St. Mary's, but then when Neil was, I believe, a freshman in high school, and that time period is when they moved to Wapakoneta, and that's where he lived when he headed off for Purdue and to be in the Navy. And so that was that connection. And that home is still, it's on the historic registry now here for the Ohio, it's part of being Ohio history. And that it's still around, and there hopefully down the road there is discussion about restoring that so it could be open to the public. The multiple times that I had talked to him, he is quiet, he was reserved, but once you start talking to him one-on-one, it's just like our conversation now. He was very personable. I felt comfortable asking him all multiple questions about the flight to the moon and so forth and so on, and other things. And I mean, one of the things I noticed when I would ask him a question, he would always think a little bit and make sure he was giving me the correct answer. But sharp as a tack, and of all the people I've met in my entire life, he has to be one of the most brilliant individuals I've ever met. It's just a lot of people I don't think realize what it took to be able to do. He was an engineer, first of all, and flight was most important to him. And the idea of him going to the moon, it was not the idea he wanted to go up there and walk on the moon. It was the idea that he was flying the most high-tech piece of flying equipment that ever existed at that time period, and probably still does today when you think about it, what they were able to do of landing on the moon. So that, was the thing that I always got from him, was the fact that it was flying that high-tech piece of equipment, doing the engineering that went into all that, far superseded any other thing. That was to the very end. That was, the whole thing of him landing on the moon. It was the flying the lunar module to the moon's surface. Yes, he did. He showed up for several. He came for the 10th anniversary. He was in the parade. He was here for the 25th anniversary. Now, he didn't actually do anything per se. He did come to the museum. And when he came, he said, "What would you like me to do?" And I gave him several options. One of those was to go to the airport at Neil Armstrong Airport down in New Knoxville. And I said, "They've got an air show going on. You want to go see that?" And he said, "Oh yeah, that sounds interesting." So we jumped in the car, and the sheriff would give us the full escort down there. And Neil just loved it. He got out, got up on stage, and even did some announcing of some of the planes that were flying back and forth while that was going on. Yeah, that's one of the curious things. A lot of people here thought he would have shown up a lot more. But the issue was, every time those anniversaries came around, NASA still had ties to him. And that came first, because even though after he was no longer a government employee, of course he still had the ties to NASA because he was the first man on the moon. And it was, many times, I asked him multiple times if he was available. And many times when we were having the anniversary the same time that NASA was celebrating everything, so it all happened at the same time. So he didn't have the opportunity, and NASA came first. It came over back here to Wapakoneta. Early on when Steve and Viola were still alive, his parents, they would come out to the museum frequently, and when I was touring some of the groups through, or my tour guides were touring some of the groups through, they would walk through with them. And they loved that. And it was the idea when the museum was first built. It was built, Governor Rose proposed that while Neil was still on the moon, he proposed, a museum be built in honor of all Ohioans who attempted to defy gravity, was a phrase that he had coined. And one of the things was, and Governor Rhodes and Steve's father were close because he was, I guess, at one time and also an auditor. May have, don't quote me, but he may have even been the treasurer of Governor Rhodes before he became governor. But they had a close relationship. There's even a picture of Neil's father and Governor Rhodes out at the birthplace drinking out of the well. So they had this close connection. So when this happened, You know, Governor Rose jumped on it in a heartbeat because he was friends with Stephen, and that was how the museum, you know, the whole thing was pulled together. Right, there's some good stories by some of the local folks around here. I wasn't even, you know, Neil was older than me, so I just hearsay of what was going on. He performed, he had a little musical group that they performed in, and from what I heard, it was quite a typical background, other than the fact that he was so smart, they were having a hard time in school of providing classes for him because he had, you know, he was far above and beyond many of the teachers that was even here in our school system. Yeah. Yeah, I think some of the cute stories that happened here at the museum, there was one good one and one bad one. He would drop in from time to time. Sometimes he would call, and other times he would just stop in. And that was a lot of the reasons for that was he was still receiving awards and trophies, and many of those items he would donate or loan to us. And as he was going by, coming back to Wapak to visit friends or whatever, he would call and say, "Hey, John, I'm going to stop by with some stuff. Are you going to be in?" And he would. One day in the middle of December, and there was hardly anybody in the museum, real quiet day. And he decided, he stopped in, he said, "Hey, I said, you want to walk through?" "Sure." So we were walking through and talking about stuff, and he was talking more about the Gemini spacecraft, and I had some questions for him. And as we were walking through, I noticed there was an older couple behind us. And the gentleman just kept poking his wife with his elbow, and he was walking with a cane along. And I never thought anything of it, but I figured they were trying to decide if that was Neil or not. So we walked all the way through the museum, and they were behind us. And so Neil, we were finished, and we went to my office, which is on the opposite side of the building here at the museum. And we're sitting there talking. I have my office door open, and next thing I know, I see a cane come right through my office door. And I see this gentleman tapping on the door. And I said, "Can I help you?" And Neil kind of turned around, and the gentleman said, "Are you Neil Armstrong?" And Neil said, he stood up, shook the guy's hand. "Yes, I am." And the gentleman wasn't even out of my office before he's hollering at his wife, and I don't remember her name, but it echoed through the building, "I told you that was Neil Armstrong." And my guess is it was probably the first time the old guy was ever right in his entire life with his wife, but he was so proud of the fact that he knew that was Neil, and she didn't think it was Neil. So that was kind of a cute little story. Well, on the flip side, he was here another time. It was in the summer, and we were a little bit busier. He had dropped some things off, and we were chatting in front of the gift shop area out here. And just as he was getting ready to leave, some guy approached him, and he kind of wanted Neil to say that he had never walked on the moon. And he became really pushy about it. I was able to step in between the two of them and made sure that Mr. Armstrong got out and got in his car. In the meantime, I had my staff call the police because I didn't know what this guy was going to do. He was acting very erratic, and he was kind of right in my face. And it's like, hey, buddy, you know, we need to calm this all down. And the police finally came out and escorted him away. But that was one of those incidents where, and it's happened before apparently with some of the astronauts. I know I'd heard the story about Buzz Aldrin punching somebody out. So, and that's unfortunate. There's individuals out there that don't actually believe that we walked on the moon. And it's strange, as time has gone by, I've heard as many as 20 or 25% of our population right now doesn't even believe that we've walked on the moon, which is unbelievable that percentage is that high. You know, I don't know that. It's possible when I think I've heard some instances where they may have gone to grandma's farm, you know, and done some work out there. And I know that later when Neil, after they came back to the moon, was living in Lebanon for a while, he lived on a farm. And I don't know if you've ever heard the story, but apparently he was doing something and jumped off a trailer and caught his ring finger and ripped the ring finger off. And they ended up, they flew him to Louisville, and they reattached it. And so yeah, he was doing some farming then. I mean, that was part of how he was growing up. Yeah.
So he showed interest from early on.
Yeah, you know, he had shown some interest when he was just a child. His father took him a ride on a Ford Trimotor when they lived up around Warren, Ohio, and that apparently piqued his interest. And then he was, you know, close enough up there to see some of the air races and some of the things that were going on, you know, in the Cleveland area. So from an early age, that's where he developed his interest in aviation and flight. I think all the years of interaction with Neil, when he would come and stop and visit and we could talk, greeting people from around the world. I've met several other astronauts who had come through the museum during that time period that I had a chance to tour through the museum. So you know, that was my childhood dreams, was to be involved in the space program one way or another, and I ended up having those childhood dreams to come true working here. I worked here over 30 years, and I started 2 weeks before the museum opened, helped install some of the very first exhibits that we had here at the museum, and it was just amazing for me to be able to work here. It was a dream job for me.